Good afternoon. My name is Katie McPherson. I'm the Director of Professional Development for BARC for Schools. So excited to have you here today. I'm joined by Clayton Cranford, and I'll let him introduce himself as well. We will be doing kind of a question and answer format with Clayton, and then we'll leave time at the end for questions, but feel free as we go along to drop questions in the chat as well. I'll turn it over to you, Clayton.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, Katie. My name is Clay Cranford. I'm a retired sergeant with the Orange County, California Sheriff's Department. And 20 years in law enforcement, most of that time was as a school resource officer. I was a juvenile investigator, and I was on our county's behavioral threat assessment team. I've done hundreds of school or threat assessments, assessing mainly students who make a threat, whether they actually pose a threat. And now I have a business where I go about and training others in behavioral threat assessment, internet safety. It's called Cyber Safety Cop. I'll tell you a little more about that as we go. But so over the last month, I've trained several hundred educators, counselors, school officials on how to do a threat assessment. And in this recent sad, tragic development at Oxford High School is something that we're talking quite a bit in our classes, and it's one of these things that we need to learn from. So thank you, BARC, for putting this together.
Clay is one of our subject matter experts here at BARC, and I actually have a personal connection as I grew up pretty close to Oxford High School. So I have friends that work there, neighboring school districts, colleagues there, and students that I have connections with that attended there. So my first call after the incident happened was to Clay about, okay, how as BARC for schools and BARC for families can we really dial not only educators, but also parents into this. So in thinking about some previous conversations we've had, we talked a lot about building a behavioral threat assessment team. So I was hoping today that you could talk about what the purpose of a BTAM team is, and if you are listening today and don't have one, how often would that team meet and what kind of training would be involved?
Okay. Yeah, so behavioral threat assessment is it's a process that has roots in there's a lot of research and science and experience going back about 15 years now with the process that somebody goes through to carry out, in this case, a school attack. And schools, this is something that has been an important thing to have, and really since Columbine, when they came out with the Safe School Initiative, it clearly articulated the need for threat assessment teams. But the difficulty is that there's maybe not a lot of training on threat assessment, how to do it. And if you do go to some of those trainings, which I've been to most of all of them, they don't always tell you and train you how to actually do it. So that was something that was a priority for me. So every school and every school district needs a threat assessment team. They need to be trained. For instance, the training that I do for schools, it's an 8-hour training day, initial training, and in that you get everything about the background of how to do threat assessments. We practice, we do scenarios, tabletop exercises, doing threat assessments. So when people leave that training, they feel confident that they can actually do it. And then there needs to be refresher training. So every year there should be some kind of update training. And I do believe in making it as practical and real as possible. So we do a lot of tabletop scenarios in those situations. But throughout the school year, if you have an established threat assessment team, that team should be meeting on a regular basis, whether that's weekly or every other week, talking about any current cases that you have, right? You have active cases that students that you're managing who are going through counseling and so forth. And then you also should be, practicing, right? Like maybe once a month or every other month, you get together and someone puts together a scenario and you do that. So it is a skill of doing a threat assessment, doing an interview, going through all the steps of and then working as a team to come up with a professional judgment for the person in concern and coming up with a management plan. Those are things that need to be practiced. Now, when I was on the threat assessment team, I did in one school year about 180 threat assessments. So I got a lot of repetitions doing this, and so that made me really conversant with it. But for most school administrators or most school counselors, maybe you do 1 or 2 a year, because we don't have to do a threat assessment on everybody who makes a threat. But we do need to know how to do that and be comfortable doing it.
Thank you so much. So today, thinking about the Oxford incident, one of my first questions after it happened when I called you was, where are the dots that weren't connected? What do we miss? As a former guidance counselor, I certainly wasn't trained in, threat assessment like I was when I was an administrator. So I can see both roles. Not having been part of the threat assessment team as a guidance counselor, I could see some of the disconnect there, but can you kind of walk us through maybe some of the things that they miss that we can learn from and really implement as best practice going forward?
Yeah. So first, starting off, the process that somebody goes through to carry out an attack is a well-known, well-recognized type of process that every human being goes through. When you have a thought, you have a goal, there's something you want to do, and then there's certain behaviors that you have to go through to accomplish that. So whether you're planning a a trip, you're going to go fly somewhere, you're going to go overseas, you're going to go someplace you've never been before, like there's research and planning and preparation and all those things that you do to get yourself on the airplane to land there is really the same kind of planning and preparation that someone would go through to plan an attack at their school. So what all this means is that these people don't just wake up one day and snap and just decide to do this. It's not a spontaneous decision that they make. It's actually a planned, thought out thing that they do. And the good news for us is that there are these behaviors are observable and they're very specific. So when we see somebody exhibiting these behaviors, then those are red flags, and that's gonna get them onto our radar. And then we need to start asking questions and digging a little bit to find out what's going on here. So and these slides that I'm showing you, these are some slides from my training class. So in the training class, we talk about the different pathways that get people onto a path of violence. That's probably more than what we need to talk about today, because I really want to talk about the behaviors. And as you can see, as someone progresses towards a violent attack, it begins with a grievance or a disappointment. It then moves into ideation, where they're thinking and fantasizing about it, and then results in leakage. I'll tell you about leakage here in a moment, which is a very important warning behavior. Research planning, physical preparation, and finally attack. And those observable behaviors, as someone gets closer to the attack, they become, I think, a little more obvious. Obviously, because we're starting out with something happening in their mind, it's a thought process that they're going through. But it finally translates into actually observable behaviors. Their activity is going to increase, and along their way there may be a triggering event. So in the case of Oxford High School, there was a precipitating triggering event, which was him being called to the office with his parents. And although that wasn't the reason that he brought a gun that day at the school, he was planning to do that anyway, based on what we know about school shootings. But that might have changed. That might change the timing, because that might have changed the window of opportunity that you had. And then internally, as people graduate towards a violent attack, internally, stressors, which are actually propelling them down this pathway, are intensifying. Their mental health may be declining as a part of that, and it leads to isolation, which is kind of like gasoline on the fire. So the more stress, the more entrenched they become in their mental health issues or their beliefs. It causes them to be more isolated, which is kind of a synergistic in a synergistic way, kind of propelling them down towards that violent attack. So I'll go over really quickly here in a little bit of detail, each one of these steps. So the grievance process, at some point, and the way I really think about this is that the people who are on a path of violence, they have a problem, right? They have a problem. That problem might be the way they perceive things happening to them. Maybe they were bullied. Maybe not in every case, they're not always the bully. Sometimes they're the bullier, or it could be their mental health. They have a problem, and they've arrived to the conclusion that violence is the way they're going to fix their problem. So they've come to a conclusion that violence is their only option. And in fact, we've seen situations where they've maybe exhausted nonviolent options, but whatever reason, they come to the conclusion. So the threat assessment team, their job is to identify these students in crisis and then give them a solution to their problem that's a healthy solution. So whether it's mental health, whether it's maybe they're being bullied, whatever the situation is, we need to intercede. We need to and give that student a healthy way of dealing with their problem. And that's what's being missed here. So it's not a disciplinary process. It's not a process where we're interested in locking them up or something like that, but really it's about addressing a core problem that they have. And that's what the threat assessment process does. It kind of unearths that problem. So once they start really fantasizing and they're coming to the conclusion that violence is an option for them, this stage leads to them often sharing their thoughts with others, and it can be done in various ways. And this is known as leakage. So they may have a fascination with weapons, and they may talk to other students about that. They may post it on social media. They have fantasies of violence and revenge, and those fantasies, dominates their thought life, and it just naturally kind of leaks out in the things that they're posting on social media. It may come out in conversations that they're having with friends. It may be indicated through something that they're doing in class, like classwork, doodling on a piece of paper, or in a writing assignment, talking about really violent images. This is really common, and there's usually a fixation with past mass killers because they represent somebody who accomplished the thing that they want to accomplish. So they have an affinity to that. And let's talk a little bit about Oxford High School. So I don't have all the information. I mean, some of this information is still forthcoming, and so I don't try to pretend like I have some special information that is not available outside the public realm of information. But we do have some things that, looking at this as a threat assessor, I can tell you that there's some issues here that needed to be addressed. And so what we're looking at here is his math worksheet. And so we have two versions of it. So the version on the left is the one that the teacher saw, was concerned, and snapped a picture of it. So it's not the best quality, but you can kind of see here there's a couple things going on. There's an image of it. He drew a gun on here. He drew somebody who's bleeding, who's been shot. He has a picture of draws ammunition. And he also mentions on here, he says, in writing, he says, "My life is useless, blood everywhere, the thoughts won't stop," and actually writes, "Help me." And then, so the teacher took the paperwork, took a picture of it, gave it back to him, and at some point got it back again from him. And then later, he's made some changes to it, right? So he's crossed out all the things that were concerning, and then he replaced it with some other writings. Video game this is, we're all friends here, harmless act, I love life so much, OHS rocks. So, this to me is somebody it's a response to somebody who's been found out, and he's trying to cover his tracks here. And one of the things I tell people in my threat assessment classes, when you confront somebody about this, they're probably going to lie, right? They're not going to tell you the truth. I mean, sometimes they do. Strangely, I've had students say, "Yes, I need help. I've been thinking about this stuff," but sometimes they don't tell the truth. And so you need to ask yourself, is what I'm seeing lining up with what they're telling me? So if he's telling me that this is about a video game that he's designing, perhaps, or something like that, then I mean, if that's what really what happened, I'm not sure. But if it did, then I would look at this and say, does that make sense? And it really doesn't. It doesn't really answer some other questions that come up from here. There's going to be research and planning. The U.S. Secret Service did a study on recent, like the last decade of school shootings, and found that the students are doing research. They're often doing it online. If you could get a hold of the search history of the people involved in this, then you probably have a very good picture of what they're looking at. Postmortem investigations of these always finds a search history that includes weapons, other school shooters, sometimes Nazis and other things like that. Mass murder is often something they're looking at too. And but the search history is clearly unusual and concerning. So it's not something that a typical teen is going to be looking at. There's physical preparation, so there's going to be weapon acquisition. They may be putting together a costume for their attack because they need to look the part. So there's definitely a tactical kind of commando, esque kind of look that they want to have. They may be practicing with those weapons. Looking back at even Columbine, those guys were going up into the woods there in Colorado and blowing things up and shooting their guns. And shooting guns and things like that in some areas is normal, and that's fine. But this is just one issue. Are they doing that in a way that is unusual, right? Like Cho at Virginia Tech, he practiced with handguns, but it was reported that he was laying the targets on the ground and shooting at the targets on the ground, which is not normally how we practice shooting. So there's certain aspects to that, again, that don't quite explain maybe their explanation for what they're doing. And then the Secret Service also said, there's just kind of a whole host of concerning behavior. So when we do threat assessments, we need to be asking about behaviors. We need to be asking about other people's perception of those behaviors. A really good indicator is talking to other students and saying, hey, how things going with Ethan, right? What are are you concerned? And without exception, people at schools where school shootings occur, other students were concerned about that student. They knew things about that student that were concerning to them. They didn't feel it was safe. And over again, whether we look at, Nicholas Cruz at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, after that shooting occurred, they all said, I bet it was Nick, without knowing who it was. They heard school shooting and they knew it was him. And so in this study that just was published a couple years ago, at least two of all the active shooters in their study, at least had two concerning behaviors prior to the attack. And in that study that you can download for free off the website, here's the list. And no shock, number one's going to be mental health and interpersonal interactions and leakage. Their school performance. So when we're sitting down across the table from a student and we're doing an assessment, these are the things we need to be asking about their mental health, asking about their friendships and how things going at school, asking about their schoolwork, ask about, what do you plan to do next year? What are you gonna do after high school? And a lot of students who are on this path, they don't have a plan after this because they know that they're probably not going to survive this attack. And there's often a quality of suicidality in their thinking. And when we look at the concerning behavior that was recently released by the DA in a press conference, apparently Ethan, regularly texts his mom about demons and ghosts in the house. And I mean, I'm going to take that at face value. That might indicate that there's some mental health issues here. He's recording torturing animals. He's making Molotov cocktails at home. He drew a sketch of himself shooting up a school in a journal, and he even texted a friend, "It's time to shoot up a school, JK." By the way, a lot of times when kids make those kinds of statements, they're often construed or misconstrued as an inappropriate joke. So it's not uncommon for someone this age to actually look for someone to participate in the attack. The older someone gets, the less likely they are to do that. But for juveniles, likely to do that, and so they may float that idea to a friend just to see what they say, and if they're kind of into it, then they may draw them into their plan. But if not, then it's kind of like, hey, just kidding, I didn't really mean anything by that. Might be a strategy that they might use.
We had a question about guns and fascination, and the question
Yeah.
was, how does a teacher differentiate a passion for guns, hunters, for example, and a worrying fascination, which I assume happened, the Monday and Tuesday as well at Oxford.
Yeah. So, and again, you kind of know your audience, so or who you're dealing with. So you have um, the fact that a student is going to go out hunting and has a rifle and wants to go hunting with his dad or something, or with a family member, like that's not unusual for a lot of places in the United States, and I think it's great. I don't have a problem with that. I guess it gets concerning when we have other things going on. So if that's baseline, if that's kind of normal, then we kind of take that into account. But if we have someone talking about, hurting people, murder, people bleeding, dying, drawing, drawing a gun on his homework, is not doesn't automatically trigger a threat assessment. But if he's writing there like the voices won't stop, there's something more to it, right? So like the idea that if someone were even, let's say someone wrote an essay in his English class, and in that essay there's somebody, like the character in the story is shooting and killing people, right? That doesn't mean you just expel that student. That doesn't just mean that doesn't automatically mean you're going to do a threat assessment. But maybe you talk to him and his friends and kind of just see what's going on. Maybe you do a little inquiry and see if there's something else going on. I think that would be appropriate.
Can we also address, there was a concern with somebody has a grandson that's kind of obsessed with video games. He's only 8 years old, a lot of shooting up, and then he and the neighborhood kids are kind of carrying that out, outside, so to speak. So can you, and I think Ethan used that as an excuse, like, I want to be a video game designer, this whole thing that I wrote here, and somebody bought it at some level, right?
Yeah. So yeah, violent video games, violent media. If those things created school shooters, we'd have a country full of school shooters. So it simply doesn't. But what does happen is you have somebody on a path of violence, and they're just thinking, and the fantasies of violence and homicidal ideas that they have. They're going to gravitate towards violent media. So it's kind of feeding that thought life that they have, and in of itself, like I know a lot of kids who play first person shooter games, and that's fine. There's nothing more to that. And in fact, like when we do a threat assessment, that's not something we're necessarily assessing, right? But when I'm talking to a student, one of the things that I do, and it helps build rapport, is that, hey, what kind of video games do you play, and what kind of music do you listen to, what TV shows do you like what's your favorite movie? And if there's a lot of violent themes happening here, that's a okay. I might be onto something here. That might be a reason for concern, but that doesn't by itself mean a whole lot. And by the way, just as a tip, if you're ever doing a threat assessment, when I assess a student, whatever they like, I like. Whatever they say is cool, I'm like, that's amazing. So I've sat across some students who are telling me that they love knives. I'm like, I love knives too. And we start talking about it. And our goal is to build rapport with that student, and just find out as much information we can about them. And so that's just a little tip for folks who are doing this. So here's on this slide here is what we assess in my threat assessment. So there are 10 kind of domains that we assess, and in this threat assessment class that I teach, I explain how we do that for each one of these, and there's actually a way to kind of quantify each one of these, and then we take this information and we come up with a risk category. We kind of quantify the risk, but you can see here we're not just looking at one thing. We're looking at a bunch of different things, and the top 5 things probably are weighted heavier than the bottom 5 things, because we're talking about, do they have a motive for violence or threat? Did they express an intent to attack? Do they have violent fantasies, homicidal ideas? Are there any pre-attack behaviors? Are they researching and planning? And then number 5 is means and access. And so all that means is, do they have access to weapons? And there's a lot of guns in homes. And so the answer would be yes. And then the other question is, do they have the cognitive ability to actually carry out that attack? So, but let's say we had means and access, and that was all we had, because most people would have a home that has a gun in it, and with, even if the gun is locked, with enough time and determination, you could probably get a kid could probably get access to that gun, right? I mean, with enough tools and enough time, probably could do it. So but that in itself, it doesn't merit a high level of concern. But it's these other things. It's a whole picture that we're looking at, and hopelessness, personal stress, and negative coping. So people who are on a path of violence tend to have poor coping skills. And at some point, like I said, they come to the conclusion that violence is going to be the way that they fix their problem. And that could be also a function of their mental health. And we could have people who are hearing voices and believe that if they don't kill people, that demons are going to get them. I don't know, or maybe they're kind of like a Eric Harris in the Columbine shooter, where you have guys, psychopath. So we could have various mental health issues here. But there's people who've been in, who've engaged in school shootings that didn't have any diagnosable mental health issues either.
So one of the things that I learned from you most recently in our previous webinar was about kind of the 4 stages or the pathway to violence. And you've mentioned a little bit already, but could you go over kind of those stages? I don't know if you have slides that match up, but I think just for my own professional and personal knowledge, it was so much easier for my brain to wrap itself around, like, how did he go from, 0 to 180 in such a short amount of time?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I can go back to that slide of the pyramid, but it's it starts out with somebody who it starts off with a grievance, and typically people, because people who have grievances, and maybe you've experienced something unfair happen to you, and it may like irk you, and you may talk about it, and but generally, people who can deal with these things in a more healthy way, eventually you get over it, right? Like eventually you realize that sometimes you're the bug and sometimes you're the windshield, and it's just that's the way life is. But people, for whatever reason, and again, it might be part and parcel of a mental health issue, is that they can't let it go, right? So it's not, and it may not just be one grievance. They may be grievance collectors, and so these grievances are just kind of like being, carrying them on top of them, and they and to the point where they almost have like a masochistic personality, where they just see their life and them as a source of things that are unfair. There's a lot of injustice. And Evan Ramsey, who was the school shooter in Beth, Alaska, this is back in the late 90s, I believe, or maybe early 2000s, late 90s. Anyway, here's a kid who's dealing with depression. He's being bullied at school, and he even goes to the principal and says, "I need help." And whatever happened, he didn't feel like it fixed the problem. So he finally got to the point where he started thinking, like, how am I going to fix this problem? And he came to the conclusion that violence was going to be the solution. So we definitely want to address those issues that come up in school, and just don't brush them off and think, well, that doesn't happen here, or or that this is not that big a deal. We need to be taking these things seriously, and also, asking some important questions about, your school's culture, I think is a big issue. And I don't know much about the school culture there at Oxford High School, but there were some other concerning behaviors that were happening there that just got released. There's a lawsuit. Predictably, there's gonna be lawsuits now, but in the recent lawsuit that was published against the school district was there was a lack of care and response to things that indicated that there was a problem with that student, and then the school administration was, and the parents knew about it, and the school administration kept sending out letters or notifications saying there's no problem here, it's not a problem. So that is not a strategy to deal with these issues. We need to be honest about what's going on, and address them. And I have some. I don't know if you want to get to this just yet, Katie, but I do have kind of like a final list of questions about kind of, if you're a school administrator and you're thinking about this, the things you should be considering.
Okay.
Do you have any questions before I get to that?
No, I just like, in thinking about Ethan specifically, so on Friday, he, received the gun as a early Christmas present. On Monday, he was researching ammo, and on Tuesday, he's drawing the drawing. So in your kind of stages back on that one slide, I think, for me, again, it was just so clear, like the research and then the planning, and then you called it a breach, and then you called it attack. So I think that's really important. As we're recording this and we'll show your slides and they can go back and look at the slides. But for me, just like a general layperson, that made so much sense to me, like research, planning, breach, attack. And I had never heard those 4 stages that clearly before. So I just wanted to bring that up before you went to your next slide.
Yeah, it makes sense, and it's backed up by a lot of research, and unfortunately we compare it to the next school shooting and we're seeing, yep, it all happened here. And I guess that's what makes this so maddening, is that after every one of these, we as a nation, we kind of talk about, like, we got to stop this from ever happening again. And sometimes I feel kind of like, and I know you, Katie, I know you feel the same way, you kind of feel like you're like, crying out in the wilderness saying, no, there is an answer to this. The answer is simple. We need more people detectors. We don't need clear backpacks. We don't need more metal detectors. We need people detectors. We need people trained to notice these behaviors, and then we need people to be able to manage that person. And it's not as difficult as or expensive that I think as schools think it is. It's not mandatory. It should be. It will be one day, I think, for sure. I think there's some point where we're just going to have to, like, understand that these things happen, and they aren't going away by us talking about it. We actually have to do something about it. But it's really about, empowering the people who are interacting with our students every day and giving them the tools to manage it. Well, let's talk about some of these important questions. So when I was looking at the Oxford situation, I think schools should be asking themselves, if we had that student at our school, what would we have done? So that and you can look at the after action reports on Arapahoe High School. I would suggest you look at the after action report on Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. It's been documented, everything that happened, what they did and didn't do. And I think it's very instructive for school districts, school administrators to look at those stories and say, if we had that student here, what would we do? So first of all, does all the staff know how to identify concerning behavior and how to report it? So here we have a teacher who's like, this is concerning behavior, and she reported it to the counseling office. Now I'm not quite sure like how that all worked, but she was able to identify that there's a problem here, and so that's great. So they did that, and good for her or him, whoever the teacher was, for doing that. But they should know how to report it and who to report it to. Do they have a systematic way of handling threats and everyone is trained on it? So in other words, you get an alleged threat, like you get a threat. There should be a way, or a known way how to handle that threat. So like in my threat assessment class, I give the attendees, I give the school district like a decision tree. So the decision tree, the first thing is like, hey, you get a threat. First thing you need to do is determine, is this a threat or not? And so I kind of explain, yeah, sometimes you get a student who says something on a playground that's not a threat, but it's overheard by someone else, perhaps, and they come into there and they're like, no, they explain it away. And you're like, okay, this isn't a threat, it was a misunderstanding. There's a lot of those happening, right? And then, okay, what if it is a threat? Maybe they use words that are threatening. And then we need to figure out, how do we know, is this a threat that we need to further investigate, or is this something that was said in the heat of the situation that they're in? They're apologetic, they feel bad that they said it, there's no other risk indicators. That's something that can be handled by discipline, counseling, and you move on. And that's like 3/4 of the threats that schools get. They get those kind of thing all the time. Is there a notification process when a threat is discovered? So in other words, let's say the teacher sees the paper from Ethan, they call the counseling office. The counseling office brings him in, they're talking about it. Does the school administrator know that happened? Does the SRO know that happened? Does the district head? Is there like a pupil services person at the district? Do they get notified? So there has to be a chain of notifications that happen, because the thing that makes threat assessments powerful is bringing different disciplines and different perspectives to bear on what's going on. So it shouldn't just be something that the psychologist or the counselor is doing. It shouldn't just be something that the SRO is doing. It should be something that they're all doing in concert with each other. Do you have a process to review a threat and determine if it necessitates a full threat assessment? So like I said, you have a kid who says, I'm going to kill you, like on the playground, and you sit him down like, hey, you said these words, what do they mean? He's like, I was angry, I'm sorry I said it, I feel horrible, and there's nothing else going on with this kid. And you're like, okay, you're gonna you miss recess next week or something, like whatever the discipline is, and then they're done. But how can you tell the difference between that and someone who actually needs a threat assessment? So that's the one thing that we cover, like how to triage threats. We don't have to do a threat assessment on everybody, but if there's other indicators, right? If they're talking about things that are indicating, ideation or homicidal ideas or something like that, in addition to, some other concerning behavior, those kinds of things, or anytime a student brings a weapon to school, that automatically initiates a threat assessment. So in the case of this student, apparently he brought ammunition, physical bullets to school. That would automatically put someone like that into a threat assessment. Are there standard safety precautions followed when interviewing a student of concern? Okay, so like I've as a school resource officer, we have students who get in trouble and they get brought into the school administrator's office. Because of my working with that school administrator, I told them, like, we do not bring students into this small little office with you without knowing what they have in their pockets. We don't do that without knowing what's in their backpack. And there's some ways we can manage that, and it doesn't have to be intrusive. But in this case, the student is sitting in a counseling office with the counselor, with the parents, and I'm assuming with the backpack there between his feet, with a handgun in it. Because right after that meeting, he leaves to go, quote unquote, go back to class, and that's when the shooting occurred. So usually when you see these things happen, it's usually like a cascade of mistakes that are made, or things that aren't followed, like or they don't have a plan, or they don't have the training. There's a bunch of different things that if one of those things, like were happening, were in place, probably wouldn't have happened. I don't know if the SRO knew about this meeting. I don't know, but I'm assuming the SRO is a competent SRO, and if they are a competent SRO, they would know. We don't do that. We don't go into these meetings with a student, even if the parents are there, without knowing what's in that backpack. Especially if you have a student concern One of the things that I do is I would inventory the backpack. I literally go through every page of their notebook, every page of their textbook, because I'm looking for indicators of leakage, and that might be written in there and or drawn or something like that. And then, do you have a trained threat assessment team? So do you have people who know how to actually do a threat assessment? Because if you don't, then basically what you're relying on is either people who are just going to talk to a kid and get a feeling, they're kind of like reading tea leaves, or kind of like, and that's kind of what happened here, right? Like they have a student who there's some things that they're concerning, but say he's a really smart kid, he's really never been in trouble before, it's fine, right? So they're just using their feelings to come up with a determination on whether this person poses a threat or not. This is not a good way to do it. You need a real process that is backed by a lot of fact and science and practice to know, are we making a good determination here? And then what do we do with that person, right? How do we manage this person? Because if you suspend or expel them, that doesn't make everything safe for you. Just because they're not on your campus anymore doesn't throw like a magic force field around your school. And I can think of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, Nicholas Cruz, expelled from that school, came back on that school campus, and was able to kill people. So so we need a plan how to deal with that person after we've talked to them about what's going on.
And I would add on that note too, sometimes there's not direct articulation between, especially at the secondary level. So like he got bounced from one school and then he went to another high school and then he went to another high school. And like individually they knew that he had been expelled or suspended, but there was a paper trail somewhere, but it was kind of disjointed and maybe not apparent in the system, like in the software system. So I think that's what we learned from that one, especially with special ed services as well.
Yeah, that is a common story where you have siloed information, right? So one school knows something about the student, but that information doesn't follow them to another school. But that's another thing. Or the police department's had contacts with this person. The CPS has had contacts with that family, but they're not sharing that information with the school district. So a threat assessment team needs to be multidisciplinary. Needs to be you need to be drawing from other stakeholders in the community to help you, like law enforcement, like social workers, things like that, mental health professionals in your community to manage these people. And then if you have a threat assessment program, then you should be maintaining that information on that student, and that is a way to kind of take that information and transfer that information to another school. But that is a huge hurdle, is sharing that information beyond whatever school attendance that they have. They go on to college, that a lot of times that information doesn't go with them, which is important. Maintaining a threat assessment program. So again, this is industry best practice. So, everybody on the team should go through an 8-hour training class, should meet regularly to discuss what's going on, practicing. It's a skill. So literally do threat assessment mock, assessments, do like tabletop exercises. You should have some ongoing refresher training every year, and that's something that should be standard for every school district. So what I did is in the notes, or in the chat rather, I threw a link to my website where it kind of describes my threat assessment class. And if you are in the California area or somewhere near here, we do have 2 threat assessment classes coming up. They're going to be up in LA. that you could go to. But if you're looking to train your entire school district, I was just out at San Jacinto Unified School District. We had 70 principals and counselors get trained on the threat assessment, so we can do that at your location as well if you're interested in finding out more about that.
So my last question, typically budgets for new school years are made February, March, April. So we've never had more money in education than we have this year due to ESSER funding and other COVID dollars, et cetera. So if someone's listening to you, beyond hiring somebody like you to come and train the entire district, are there other tandem programs? One thing that comes to mind is our school district has a really great web page that has kind of check the box things, right? But I, even as a very engaged parent and as an educator, like, I really don't know what their plan is, right? So what are some ways that people like you or the district themselves can share with parents without giving away too many details, right? About actual plans. Like, I'm not talking about, I want to see your documents of what you would do if. I really think that one of the missing pieces that I see is parent engagement in this process and how we can help the school and people like you, and we can help kids report and feel safe reporting, having anonymous tip lines, et cetera, whatever that looks like. But what are some ways that we can share the responsibility as parents as well?
So so one of the things that I do, like a parent or community, like 90-minute class for parents, educators on this. So it's basically kind of what we covered today. What are the warning signs? What they look like? But I also want to encourage parents to engage their children in their digital world. So one of the things I do is I do a lot of cyber safety, internet safety education for parents and students. My book, Parenting in the Digital World. But a lot of the threats and a lot of the issues are happening online. So parents who are engaged in their child's digital world, who are using an app like Bark, I recommend every parent put Bark on their child's phone, because it's going to be running natively in the background, and it analyzes, through this technology to identify words and phrases, things that indicate there's a problem, and not just with violence, but of various things. And Bark does that, and it offers that to schools as well, for free. But so all these things, so I think about it as more of like an overlapping kind of system, right? So it looking at your kid's phone, talking to them about things that are going on, that's one really important layer that we need to have. We need kids who feel safe to come to parents and say, hey, there's something that I see going on and I'm concerned. The school should have that same kind of relationship with their students where, hey, if you see something, please share it with us. We're here to help people. You're not snitching. And make it simple for them. So, and make it something that it's not difficult to do with regards to, just emotionally difficult. So some kind of anonymous tip line, right, where they can take a screenshot from something they see on social media and send it to the school. They don't have to walk into an administrator's office and have to kind of do that. That's tough for a kid to do. So make it simple, make it easy, make it something that's not going to cause a lot of turmoil for them. Parents need to have that same kind of conversation with their kid, and be looking at what's going on with in their child's digital world. Use tools like Bark, and so that goes a long way, actually, because school violence is not your kid's biggest threat, not by a long shot. I mean, schools are still the safest place for your kid to be. Schools have to have a threat assessment team. You're going to have a ton of threats. Kids say crazy stuff, like they're impulsive. It happens. You need to know how to bifurcate the kid nonsense, the things that we don't need to worry about, and the things that we do need to worry about. Like, if you don't have a threat assessment program, you can't do that. So either you're stuck with doing nothing or expelling everybody, and neither one of those are a good option. But we need to engage kids, and we need to give them some support, and by parents being engaged is the most important thing, right? But I was saying before, like your kids dealing with bullying, they're dealing with sex, they're dealing with pornography, there's all these things that alcohol and drug use. self-harm, all this stuff's being discussed online, and it's informing your child's opinion about these things. So you want to be part of that conversation, mom and dad. You should know about what your child's digesting online, and it gives you the opportunity to step in and provide the parenting wisdom that you have for them. So there's other really big important issues here, but safety is the number one. But school safety, again, school's still the safest place for your kid to be, but we can't, just hope it's all going to work out, right? We have to have a plan to deal with things, because when they do happen, the consequences are so horrible that they cannot be realized, right? I mean, this community there in Oxford, near Oxford High School, that community is ever changed. They're gonna think about their world before and after this event. Think about the families of the children who died and were injured. Those families will be changed forever. The children who are there at that school, they will be dealing with this psychologically for the rest of their lives. The school district is going to have hundreds of millions of dollars of lawsuits coming down on top of them. The school administrators are involved. They're being personally sued. The parents of Ethan are in jail and maybe going to prison. I don't know. But the point is that this is so devastating that the solution is so simple and not expensive and doesn't take a lot of time. And I think all your staff will really, really appreciate knowing how to deal with this. And like you said, there's so much money for the social emotional welfare of your children, especially coming out of COVID, that take advantage of that money and this opportunity. Because again, kids who will land on your threat assessment team or your threat assessment situation are kids who are struggling. They're kids in crisis. So if we are addressing these students, we're going to be catching a whole bunch of kids who are struggling in other areas of their life, not just threats. So it's really kind of a bigger umbrella of keeping kids safe, addressing kids in crisis.
For sure. That sort of concludes my, canned questions. So I'll open to the audience for feedback, questions, concerns, freak out moments, anything that you have, we will take. And feel free to open your mic as well, or you can drop it in the chat.
We have some questions in the question area.
I answered oh, okay. Sorry. I'll go ahead and read those. I didn't see the ones below. Sorry. Oxford shooting. Why didn't the SRO step in and require the parents to take the child home? I understand you may not have the answer to this, but if the school counselor made the request he go home, I assume for further evaluation, how could the parents not be required by law enforcement to do so?
That's a great question. In fact, I was in front of a group of educators just a couple days ago, and they asked exactly like, how does this happen? It's kind of baffling. Because I mean, think about like you have a kid that you're so concerned about that you call the parents in, the parents come, and then you say take your kid, and they're like, we're not taking them. But then you're so concerned that you say you need to have a psychological eval for this kid in 48 hours. So they weren't willing to leave it there, right? They were at least so concerned that they said you need to have this eval. So what I'm thinking is I would say, look, if we're so concerned about your student, about them hurting themselves or others, that we're going to require you to do a mental health eval on this kid. What I would say is, if you don't take your kid, we're calling the ambulance and we're taking them to the ER, and you can meet them there. Like that would have solved that problem. I don't think it's up to the SRO necessarily to make that happen. I think the school could do that, but yeah, I wonder how involved the SRO was in this whole thing. I would hope that he wasn't that involved, because again, coming from an SRO myself, or former SRO, they're there to kind of support the school. I mean, if it's not a crime, then or if he's not an immediate threat to himself, like he can't necessarily just grab this kid and run off to the hospital with him. I mean, but the school can say we're calling an ambulance and your kid's going to get transported. So that would have been one way to handle it.
Yeah, and just an assumption, having been a guidance counselor, I know they did a suicide risk assessment on him and asked if there was a gun, and the parent said yes, and we got to go back to work. So my assumption, again, is that the counselor said to herself, well, he's safer here than at home if there's a gun in the nightstand. So just a super unfortunate, misconnection of dots. Amanda asked, what would you have done differently that day that Ethan was called into the office when parents refused to take him home? Would you have called law enforcement? I think you just addressed that.
Yeah, and I would have searched his backpack, like, and that would have revealed the gun, and now everything's different. So again, these little decision points that I think are routine. I don't know if that's written down anywhere, like, but that's, as a law enforcement officer, I don't sit down in a room with somebody that I don't know. If there's a backpack, I need to know what's in it. So that's just kind of how, and I believe the other SROs that I worked with, I believe that was a common practice.
And what is the protocol for going down to get that child who the teacher sends that very graphic homework assignment up, and we're concerned he may have a weapon? So is it two people going to get him and we take the backpack from him and walk him up? What does that look like protocol wise?
It's actually really simple. So we would get, hey, there's a kid last night on social media posted something about a gun, right? Where is he right now? He's in class. The SRO goes and gets that student, and he separates him from that, or her from that bag. So I got the bag in one hand, and I'm escorting the student up. And if there's a bulky jacket, maybe we'll get outside, we remove that student from the classroom, and with another administrator there, I'll say, hand me the jacket. I pat down the jacket. I just do a visual 360 on the student. Just nothing, everything looks good. I retain that backpack and we go. So we've had that happen a lot of times. And actually that's something that, like, my school administrator and I would talk about. I'm like, okay, what if we had somebody, because we've had students in the classroom use our text to tip and say, hey, there's a student in my class who has a knife in their backpack. So I've gotten those before. But what if there was a student who said, there's a student in my class with a gun in their backpack? So we actually have a student who says there's a gun in the classroom right now. Like, what would we do? So we kind of like game plan, okay, what would we do in that situation? Like, I'd walk in and I basically get a hold of that backpack, put my hand on the kid's shoulder, maybe have another administrator help me, and we evacuate the class. We get everybody out of that classroom immediately, and then we take it from there. But as opposed to like picking a kid up and moving him out of the classroom, I'd rather have him stationary, sitting, and then everybody leave. But like, those are the kind of conversations you need to have as a school administrator. Like, what would we do if this were to happen? And just start kind of game planning these things, because if you don't, in that moment, you kind of have to figure out what you're going to do. It may not be the best response plan.
We have about 2 more minutes left, so I want to make sure. Julie is asking if you have some sort of screener or assessment to share for free that we could send out with this recording, or assessment tool if they don't have a threat assessment team assembled already. Do you have like a best practices screening tool or a website that you could send?
I can point you to the U.S. Secret Service has a document on kind of like best practices for school threat assessments. I have a threat assessment tool that I've created. I have a guide, like a guidebook for it and everything. That's not something I give away because I need to train you on how to use it. So what I don't want is people taking that and then just kind of like, because you can go online and you can Google threat assessment tool and you can find a ton of them. And then you can just kind of wing it. That's not a good idea. So whenever there's an issue, because you can do a threat assessment on somebody and something bad can still happen. Like there's no guarantee, right? But what you want is you want something that's defendable. So you need to be able to demonstrate, like, we have training, we're using an industry best standard. Like my threat assessment tool has been reviewed by the U.S. Secret Service threat assessment office, and they're like, this is perfect. You need and you need something in writing, right? You need a policy on for your school on how you do this. So like those questions that I asked, you need to have that. So yeah, if you want to email me, I can send you the link to that document. It's for free. You can download it off the Secret Service's the National Threat Assessment Office's website. And that's a good primer. But I recommend you get the full training.
Okay, we have one last question. Does demographics play a role in threat assessments? So across the board, I'm assuming different.
Like traits, like age or?
Probably maybe more like Title I versus a more affluent school. Like, is the threat assessment tool kind of universal in its approach?
Oh, it is. It looks at behaviors and facts, not traits. So it doesn't matter, you know, whoever we're dealing with. And actually, what it makes it very equitable. Schools that use this, they have fewer expulsions and suspensions. Because again, if you don't have a threat assessment team and a plan, like, you tend to expel more people. And we know from experience that when you expel students, that could lead them down a pathway to incarceration, frankly. So we want to keep kids in school. We want to address the issues before they get out of control. Because once a kid steps beyond just, you know, they're thinking about things and they're indicating that there's a problem, that's our opportunity to step in and help that kid in crisis. As soon as they bring a gun to school and they hurt somebody or some kind of combination of that, then we're kind of in a situation now where we're looking at it's punitive, right? After that. So I mean, especially if a kid actually hurts somebody. So we want to catch these kids. We want to scoop them up before they ever get to that point and help them, because that doesn't have to be the end of their story. That doesn't have to be what happens. And again, the way it affects others, the pebble being dropped in the middle of that lake, those ripples that come out, like change lives and generations of people in a way that is so horrible and impactful. I can't think of a lot of things that we can do that are more important than this. And thankfully, again, this isn't happening at every school, but every school needs a threat assessment team, because there's always a threat and there's always kids who are in crisis, and this will provide a solution for both those things.
Well, you have been super helpful. Just one last thing that came to my mind was, after the Oxford shooting, 60 school districts in the Metro Detroit area either shut down for a week because of copycat threats, or because students were so anxious about what was going down. So when you said ripple effect, it kind of triggered me to think about, like, just how much this impacted not just this school, but obviously the whole state and metro area. So your contact info is there. They can get in touch with you at clay@cybersafetycop.com. Looks like you have a Facebook page, Twitter, LinkedIn.
All things.
Yes, and just on behalf of Bark First Schools, as Clay said, we do supervise schools for free and alert schools to any signs of distress or threats or depression, anxiety, etc. So you can reach out to me at katie.mcpherson@bark.us, or just go to bark.us. And I just want to thank everybody for being here today. When I scheduled this, I didn't realize that Monday is a day off for a lot of us. So I hope you have an amazing weekend. And again, thanks so much for your commitment to student safety, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much. Thanks, Clay.
Thank you, everybody. Be safe.